The next empires we're going to take a look at are China's. And these two, the major empires during this classical era are going to be the Qin and the Han dynasties. And these dynasties developed out of ancient Chinese dynasties, with the Jia being the first one, although it's kind of mythical. We don't know if it actually existed. And then you have the Shang, the Zhao, and we'll have the Warring States era, which will allow the Qin and the Han to rise up. So, starting off though, we need to talk a little bit about dynasties and how they work. And there's this thing in China called the dynastic cycle, which says dynasties will last, dynasties last in this kind of pattern, or go in this kind of pattern, that a new family will establish a dynasty, and it will be strong and do many great things. And then after a while, it will grow weak. It could be one generation, it could be many generations, but it will grow weak, and it will lead to the people being divided, many more rich people, or the rich people controlling too much of the wealth, or abusing the rights of the poor, and this will then lead to rebellions, internal and external conquests. Could also see natural disasters happening, and people will take this as a sign from the gods that, or from heaven, that this dynasty shouldn't be running things anymore, and so a new dynasty will rise up. And we'll see that happen here with the Qin and the Han. And this ability to rule, or this idea that you have the power to rule in China, is known as the mandate of heaven, being that the gods or heaven has given you the right to rule because you're doing a good job. However, if you start doing a poor job, that mandate goes away, and a new people or new dynasty can be established. So the Warring States period, just briefly, happens after the fall of the Zhao dynasty. The many families that control the different regions during the Zhao fight for control, and this will last 200 years or so, with them trying to fight each other and this chaos going on, until they're finally united under the Qin dynasty. But before that happens, we have three major philosophies that rise up: Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism. We're not going to take a look at those here in this. We're going to look at those next week when we talk about the religions during this time period. But these three dynasties will guide, or three philosophies will guide the new dynasties, the Qin and the Han. So the Qin are the first to reunite China, and we actually get China's name from this. And the leader was Qin Shi Huangdi. And he was a very brutal leader. He had control over everything, and it was his word that made everything. And if you went against him, you were probably killed, or exiled, or something else. But he does establish a bureaucracy, or a group of unelected officials, to help him run the government, the day-to-day functions, so he didn't have to do everything like that. So think of people that collect taxes, people that enforce the law codes, all those things. He also performed the first national census to see how many people are in China, and he created a single law code that was very strict, based on the ideas of legalism, to make sure everyone stayed in line. And this worked really well for him during his lifetime, but as you can see, the dynasty only lasts from 221 to 206 BCE, and that is because that is during his lifetime. After he dies, the empire falls apart. And part of the reason for this, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, is that he was way too demanding. He built things like the Great Wall and many public works, which are great, and that you have this wall that's there to defend you from northern invaders, but it's also very expensive to do that, and when you're using forced labor, people aren't too happy with it. And then using an army to go and expand to new territories is very, very expensive. So he has to collect a lot of taxes. And with the taxes and the forced labor, people go, we don't know if we want this anymore. And so after he dies and is buried in his tomb, which you can see all these terracotta warriors over to the side here, this is part of his tomb. Another reason why they might not like them, because of this forced work. But after he dies, they get rid of his dynasty, and a new dynasty will rise up called the Han Dynasty. But here's the extent of the Qin. You can see also the Great Wall that they were building up at the north here. And so that was all to protect them from invaders from areas like Mongolia and northern China. But they fall And what we have is the Han Dynasty comes out of that. And the Han Dynasty will last from 200 BCE roughly to 220 CE. And it's led by a guy named Liu Bang. He led a peasant revolt against the Qin Dynasty and will be the victor of that peasant revolt and will make himself emperor. Instead of following legalism, which is very strict, he follows an idea of, or the philosophies of Confucianism, and had the bureaucrats focus on learning about Confucianism and running the government in that manner, and that would lead to the greatest of the Han Dynasty emperors, Wu Di, creating a civil service exam, so a test you have to take to become a bureaucrat in China based on the ideas of Confucianism. Big thing though with the Han Dynasty is that they will again expand territory, and with that, since they are not fighting as much as the Qin do, they'll bring peace to much of China and Asia in uniting these regions. And so the areas they conquer Korea, Vietnam, and areas in Central Asia, and these conquests will allow, and the peace that comes from them, allow a trade route to be established known as the Silk Road, which links China with India and then also with the Middle East, and through that Rome and Europe in the West. And this is a major accomplishment. We're going to talk about this a little bit later with all the greatness of what the Silk Road did and how trade really helps humans interact and connects us all together. That's going to come later, but just know that they're an integral part. Them and also the Roman Empire, who we talked about earlier, are the reasons why the Silk Road is allowed to be established between the East and the West. And one thing they also do is they continue building the Great Wall of China, which you can see here. This is not actually theirs. It's rebuilt several times by other dynasties, and I believe this is the Ming Dynasty Great Wall that's here. So, big thing that allows the Han Dynasty to thrive and have that Silk Road is they use forced labor, but it's not as strict as the Qin Dynasty. They control iron and salt production, which are necessary for building armies and for preserving food. They create a set of standard weights and measures, which keep corruption down. They focus a lot on trade, and they build canal systems to connect China together instead of just relying on roads. And so this does a great amount of good for them and allows the dynasty to last for about 400 years, which is one of the longer reigning dynasties in Chinese history. And so here we can see the extent of their empire. They go pretty far west, at least for Chinese empires. We'll see a couple get farther than that, but for the most part, this is pretty far, and they extend that Great Wall all the way through that, making sure those northern invaders can't invade.